Hello again. Welcome to the EUA CDE online annual meeting. My name is Alexander Haskell and I'm with Thomas Jergensen, who is Senior Policy Coordinator at EUA. His responsibilities include many issues, including overall policy development and managing cross-cutting issues with policy relevance. But many of us know Thomas, of course, because he was also head of the EUA Council for Doctoral Education quite since the beginning. So the fact that we gather today is also thanks to Thomas. So in the name of the CDE community, thank you for that. And welcome back to EUA CDE, at least for now half an hour, to exchange with us the EUA strategy, a vision for the future, Universities 2030. Some words about you. You studied actually history and German studies at the Universities of Copenhagen and Free University of Berlin. Your doctorate in history and civilization, you received it from the European University Institute in Florence and worked as postdoctorate fellow in Copenhagen and University Libre in Brussels before joining us at EUA. You worked actually there on students and left-wing movements around 1968 and have published also about other issues of youth movement, especially in World War I. So we're actually two historians and would certainly love to talk about the past and how things have been going. However, let's look into the future. Let's look into visions for the universities. And you are going to present EUA Vision for the Universities, Universities 2030, Universities Without Wall. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alexander. And it's of course a weird way to be back here, because I can't see anybody. I'm sure I would still know some faces if I was live, but there we go. There we go. It's nice to be back anyway. I'm going to talk a little bit about the overall vision that we have for universities for the next 10 years, and where doctoral education fits in. And it of course fits in fairly well because it's such a core activity. So I will run through some slides and I hope we can get a good discussion afterwards. So our vision is called Universities Without Walls. And that should speak for itself. It's very important that it's for the sector and by the sector. This means this is not a policy blueprint we give to policymakers, even though there are issues in it that can be used that way. And it's the voice of universities. It's not somebody else telling us what to do. It's the sector itself saying what it wants to do. And that was, if you put it into a policy perspective, that was the goal of the vision, to say, we are capable of outlining our own future. Thank you very much. It builds on quite extensive consultations with experts and university leaders from the EUA community, including the CDE steering committee, which gave some very, very good input to particularly some of the issues I'm going to talk about today. And it was published a couple of months ago. When the slides are available, you can click on the link and you can read it. So what is the context of this? There is a societal context that's important. When we planned this, there was no pandemic yet. That's important. We planned it to say, that there are things going on already. And some of these things are, of course, a sustainability challenge, climate change, but not only climate change and environment. There's the disruption through technology. We have talked about that for years and years. We talked about that with MOOCs, and we talk about that with artificial intelligence, and if it disrupts labor markets, etc., etc. We've seen the issue of democracy and academic freedom coming up increasingly, which is important. Social disparities, it's coming ever more to the fore. Also, and it's connected to many of the other issues. And then we have changing geopolitics, which has become much more pointed as an issue in the last year and continues underfunding. We did this during the pandemic, and the pandemic saw all these things change, accelerate. All these things became much more obvious. Social disparities, for instance, that suddenly not only not everybody has access to their own computers, but not everybody has access to a quiet space for learning. Just to give an example about that. A technological disruption was maybe a little bit more of a positive story for universities that managed to go online very, very fast. But I think it's a common experience that the pandemic has accelerated change. So what does the vision look like? We have goals, we have factors for success, and we have priorities for action. And I will focus on the first and the last one of this presentation. So the goals: openness, sustainability, autonomy. I'll talk about that. And priorities: reform of academic careers. There you already see doctoral education. The lamps are blinking. Interdisciplinarity, again, not a foreign issue for CDE, and strengthening of civic engagement. So when we say openness, what do we mean? It's about being open, it's about being transformative, it's about being transnational. It's universities that are cooperative and networked. So that's the universities without walls. They are fluidly a part of society, but it doesn't mean that they become a function of the needs of society. They are still places with their own values. And one important function or one important value is a place for respite. It's a place where you actually don't have to answer needs of others all the time. You can test out new ideas. You can discuss new things in a critical way. But there's a lot of co-creation. You need to do this in dialogue. You can't be just ivory tower. Let's test some ideas by ourselves. There needs to be some kind of connection. International openness, and that is a prerequisite nowadays for quality. And then what we're going into with the pandemic, a hybridization of universities. The physical and virtual spaces, how those are not separate but combined in a new way. And there's a whole presentation to be had about this. Sustainability, important. This is not only climate change and environment. We've seen the Sustainable Development Goals generally has become the main framework for engagement with society. And there are good reasons for that. I think at least my own anecdotal evidence says there was a long period where it was all about competitiveness and economic growth. And universities did not feel really comfortable with that because we do many more things. And then you have the Sustainable Development Goals, and they suddenly give a much more holistic framework to work in and a better way to show what universities do. I talked about social disparities. The social and welfare aspects of sustainability have become important and are very important. The same with well-working societies and having a global responsibility, so that we have a inclusive global research and higher education community, which is not the case today. It's still dominated by the North Atlantic plus East Asia. Autonomy, of course, important point for EUA generally. In order to do these things, to be open, to work for sustainability, universities need to be able to make their own strategic choices. And in order to make their own strategic choices, you need to have some kind of autonomy. You need to be able to organize your own budget. You need to be able to accredit your own programs and things like this. Doesn't mean you're not accountable. You're accountable to society at large. You are also internally accountable to your staff, students. And it's important that autonomy also supports academic freedom. Not the same thing, but there's a support of that. And a point I think is dear to CDE is professionalization, which is basically the narrative between much of the work of CDE in the last 10 years has been professionalization. In order to be able to move strategically in society, you need professional staff that can fulfill these functions. For instance, in a doctoral school. So those in the audience that are in the Pride network, for instance, I think would be happy with that message. But that's very strong. Now, where's the place of doctoral education in this? if you go back to this, it's a place of respite, it's a place of testing your idea. That's basically what you do in your doctorate. It's one of the few periods in your academic life where you have 3-4 years for deep reflection, really deep reflection. And that is a way that doctoral education reproduces these values, the culture, the structure of a university. And that is important because as much as you work with society, universities need to stand on their own values, their own culture. But it is key to interaction with society. It's the glue of international cooperation. We know that from various projects and reports. We also know that with the growth of doctoral education that happened about 10 years ago, a growing number of doctorate holders take leadership positions in the rest of society. I could have taken a bar chart here that we have numbers on this, and they take to some extent these values with them of rigor, curiosity, respect for evidence. And then, of course, as I said before, you have the professionalization of doctoral education. That's key to professionalization of universities. I could have taken in here the industrial doctorate as well, but I think that sort of goes without saying, and it's also a thing that's not maybe particular to the doctorate. You have placement options and things like this in other programs. But it's clear that doctoral candidates play a big role. So what is to be done? What is very important, and I think what came up also from our discussions with the steering committee, is academic career reform. We need to broaden the idea of the academic beyond publishing, and that is of course key in doctoral education. Say, yes, it's very important you write your thesis, but if you're already in doctoral education, become accustomed to the idea that high impact publishing is all that counts, then we're not getting the rounded academics we want. That of course doesn't mean that you don't retain the core goals of research, sorry, and to broaden our knowledge, but you need to have all the things in there: teaching, engagement with the society, etc., etc. You need, and I think this is a strong point, to make careers less precarious. If you want an academic career, it's not good for anybody that you only know if you made it by in the mid-40s. And you also need flexibility. You need to be able to come into careers. And this is all essential for early stage researchers. What you want to do as well is recognizing interdisciplinarity. You need to recognize and reward interdisciplinary activities, while remembering that in order to be interdisciplinary, you need to be disciplinary. You need to have your own knowledge and identity. And again, this is something that is typically a thing you could do while you do your doctoral project. Say, well, I can begin to learn in a way that I couldn't do when I was a master or bachelor, to learn to share that knowledge with people that speak differently, think differently. That can, of course, STEM versus social science, humanities, but I can assure you also within the humanities, people think and speak differently and different. I think the whole issue of disciplinary cultures is extremely interesting. You're allowed to do different things. Alexander and I are historians. Historians are known to be a tough discipline. We are not nice to each other, and it's part of the game. And it's about finding out what's wrong with your research. And in education, for instance, you're much more supportive. And knowing these things is important if you want to be an academic, because otherwise you go into to work with educationalists and you offend them all, and you're known as the nasty person, even though that's not the case. So it's a part of academic professional development, and there you go. That's important for early stage researchers. Here's the role for doctoral schools and doctoral education professionals. These things do not appear by themselves. You need to have structured ways of coordinating interdisciplinary interdisciplinary projects, interdisciplinary activities, making sure that this is part of professional development. And then the last part, which is broader, civic engagement. How do you train future scholars, let's say scholars instead of academics, because we know 90% go elsewhere and bring sort of the scholar identity with them. And learn to participate in societal debate. How is that done? How do you write a newspaper piece, for instance? How do you do science communication a good way? I think this is personally, I think this is a place with the whole podcast wave that has gotten a huge boost forward. And that could be, how do you do a science communication podcast? I don't think that's easy. There's of course a much more basic civic skill of supporting an evidence-based debate. That is, as societies develop with fake news, alternative facts, call it what you want. The idea that you go out, your doctoral candidates go out in society and are able to support and promote an evidence-based debate, the way we discuss within universities, where it doesn't matter who says things, but it matters if the argument and the evidence is good. And then there's, of course, respect for diversity and debate within the university itself. That needs to be the values of the university. That's a soft skill. I think it's also increasingly a core competence, no matter where you go. You need to be able to think deeply in your discipline, but communicate it to people that are not deeply in your discipline. To communicate it so it makes sense in a societal way. I think in EUA we sometimes know this. We were drafting a document the other day and we had a long discussion about critical theory. But of course, you can read that document very, very well without actually knowing critical theory. It's not there anywhere, but it's behind. There's a connection between the deep knowledge of a certain theoretical complex and a societal engagement, actually a political document. And it's also about the institutional culture. I spoke about disciplinary cultures. You need a culture where this is promoted. The evidence-based debate and rigor, where these things are promoted and valued. So those are sort of three areas where we say, this is where you can begin to work tomorrow or yesterday to attain those goals of openness, sustainability, and autonomy. So just to sum that up, I think doctoral education is at the core of realizing the vision, because it's about academic reproduction to a large extent. I think the core challenges of the vision are also core challenges of doctoral education. Just take the whole professionalization issue, which is very important. It's about being responsive and influential. So I spoke about all these trends in the beginning. It's about responding to those trends, but it's also about leading those trends. Saying, yeah, universities, for instance, have a big role in promoting a responsible use of technology, because we educate the people that develop these technologies. And important thing, we do all this, but we retain the core academic values, which is, of course, again, a reproduction issue. So I will stop there. Many thanks for your attention. And I'm looking very much forward to discussing this.
Thank you very much, Thomas. It was indeed very rich presentations with plenty food of thoughts and plenty questions which have certainly arisen among our participants here. So please use the question and answer session, and I will read it and then also ask the questions to you. But before we enter with the questions, maybe one question. When we looked into how what we have discussed in the last 2 days in this annual meeting, it was a lot about societal actor putting some pressure on doctoral education, being it on when we talked about academic freedom, even a society or political actors telling you should do this or should do that, not. when we spoke about skills, some stakeholders having sometimes short-term interest, what the doctorate should entail or not, communities who have this goal. So the question would be, talking about universities without walls, should and to what degree doctoral schools should build also a certain wall then, or not?
I'd say we should build walls if our vision is called University Without Walls. But I understand what you say, because, and I'll do a little bit of publicity here. We are on, I believe, Monday, coming out with a sort of follow-up publication to this vision about scenarios for the future and what they mean for realizing the vision. And one of the conclusions in that report is that a major threat to universities is if you see them as utilitarian. Oh, universities are there to fulfill this one specific function in society. Because universities have a broad function, and many of these different functions that universities have strengthen each other. And for instance, if you say, yeah, doctoral education, it should be much more directed towards the labor market. Yes and no. It's of course good that that doctorates can enter the non-academic labor market after they graduate. Most of them do. It's not a huge problem in most disciplines. But it's not vocational training, not even for academia. It's about getting an experience of real deep reflection, year-long deep reflection on a problem. This is what it's about. It's not about fulfilling a function in society that we need more doctorates in this or more doctorates in that. It happens to be a very good thing to do for expanding the limits of human knowledge, for developing our disciplines, for reproducing our academic system. It's also a very good leadership education. It's all of this, but once you make it utilitarian, that is a threat. And it's politically, but it's also economically. You say, let's get more and more data about these doctoral candidates so that we can sort of apply learning analytics and sell more courses or whatever it is that we want to do. So yeah, I can make a little bit of publicity on Monday. The Pathways publication is coming out, looking at what can happen in the future. What happens if the world looks wildly different from today? There's a lot of that as well, but there's also a lot of use of technology and things like this. So that's it's a good question. There should not be walls, but it should not be utilitarian. I think that's the point.
Exactly, and I think the more we understand what doctoral education is, the more, I guess, we can also exchange and interact with others and also explain our point. But to do that, we have a question from Claudine Leisinger from University of Zurich, who says, totally agree with civic engagement and the importance to participate in societal debates. However, in times of budgetary cuts, universities are actually tending to cut exactly these activities, especially regarding training doctoral candidates to speak to a broader public. How can we counter this trend?
I mean, I won't say that you can do things in a frugal way. I think it's important to say if you want this, you need to invest in it, and I think it's also about priorities. You shouldn't down prioritize this completely, because it is really, really important. It's not only to speak to a large audience, it's to write for a large audience as well. Try to write an opinion piece for a newspaper. How do you do that? It's not overly difficult, but you have to learn it. There are tricks that you learn, and you have to have also awareness. You also learn from reading the newspapers. This was a really well written article. I can see the tricks that were used there. But how to counter this trend is to continue, no matter how little money there is, continue to at least say this is important, even if we can't hire a trainer or anything like this. Say this is important, An idea could maybe be to say, are there anybody in the department that's already doing this that we can use internally? Because much of the courses, of course, if you have external consultants coming in to teach this, say, do we have a senior member of staff that can be a sort of a role model for this? And then it's one thing that doesn't cost money directly is, of course, to say, culturally, this is something that we support and we promote among our doctoral candidates, that you engage. It doesn't need to be in some disciplines, it will be political. If you work on gender or race, it's likely to be political. In some cases, it's science communication. Isn't it fantastic that there is a new theory that we can do away with dark energy in the universe? It can be both. It doesn't need to be overly changing society. It can also just be love of knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Now we have really little time, so 2 questions, each question maybe 1 minute to answer. How do you see the role of master's education in changing the common view on the PhD being only focused on publishing? So changing expectation actually of the master students already? This question by Yannick.
I suppose it also has to do with what your entry requirement is for a PhD, and in the humanities, there's of course a lot of competition, and if you already have done some kind of publication, that's very good, and then you get into this, that's what it counts, right? You need to have the right kinds of publications on your CV. Where I see an interesting development is the rising expectations and attraction of challenge-based learning from the bachelor onwards, where you are much more problem engaged. You might already have done projects with local industries. You might already have done interdisciplinary projects in your groups. You might even have done a startup during your master. If that suits your profile. So I think that trend with challenge-based learning is something that I would see as positive, also to break the, it's about words on paper idea, which of course you need words on paper, but it's good to be able to do other things as well, and that's not the only thing an academic does. So I see that as I can just add, but one thing we need to ask ourselves is, if the bachelor and master become much more challenge-based, they begin to look like the PhD. What is then the added value of the PhD beyond 3 years of time? But that's a wide field.
So now you actually have a topic for a whole next annual meeting about where the limits and the differences between bachelor, master, and the doctorate. However, we won't have time to discuss this in the next 30 questions, also not the other 2 questions which are still in the Q&A. Apologies for that, but some of them will certainly be, can also maybe be discussed in the next sessions or later when we speak about collaboration in doctoral education. So first of all, thank you very much, Thomas, also to share your experience and connecting actually this vision about a new university without walls in exchange to society, and how to support actually doctoral candidates in these interactions and in this context. Thank you for that. So now some technical information. We are going immediately now to the parallel sessions. For doing that, please click on Leave on the right upper side, and then go to the lobby, and from the lobby you can go to one of the 3 parallel sessions where we will discuss a lot of these issues. Actually, we are discussing now, for instance, how is doctoral education organized, the role of postdoctoral researchers, and maybe also what are the limits there between doctorate and postdocs and so on. So thank you very much, Thomas, for being with us. looking forward to seeing all of you soon in the next session. And by saying that, thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.